Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I am Jen and this is Fundie Fridays, and here on my channel I usually talk about different aspects of Christian fundamentalism while I do my makeup. And today's episode is special because it's actually an old episode and I just wanted to give you a little bit more updated information about the subject, but this is not a new video and you probably have seen it before. And I fully plan on George Lucasing everything and, adding CGI aliens. Just kidding. But I did edit this video because there was a few factual inaccuracies. I also mumbled a lot and cut out like the ends of a lot of sentences, so I needed to fix that. And I also wanted to blur out the faces of the minors in this group because there are quite a few. And I'll also talk about the new-ish documentary Keep Sweet, which just came out on Discovery Plus. But before we begin talking about this horrible monster man and his very eccentric flock, here is a word from our sponsor. Something that I never thought I'd be able to say a year ago. Today's episode is sponsored by Surfshark VPN, a service that is fast, easy to use, and affordable. Everything you could ever want from a VPN, really. And because I love you all so much, I have a deal for you. If you go to surfshark.deals/Fundie Fridays and use my code Fundie Fridays, you can get 83% off a 2-year plan plus 3 extra months for free. And if you break the math down on that one, it actually makes your subscription $2.50 a month, which is a phenomenal deal. Surfshark encrypts your data and reroutes it through one of their 3,000 servers in over 65 countries to keep prying eyes off of your browsing history and personal data. So whether you're trying to unlock geo-restricted content on sites like Netflix or just browsing anonymous cat videos online, Surfshark VPN has you covered. And don't forget that VPNs are also useful for keeping you safe and your data encrypted on public networks like those in coffee shops or malls. And having privacy like this can also save you money by preventing commercial websites from price gouging you. Surfshark is available on a massive list of devices and operating systems like Android, iOS, most smart TVs and game consoles, and having it available on all these different platforms is great because with one Surfshark account, you can protect everybody that lives in your house. In short, pretty much anybody that goes online nowadays needs to be using a VPN, so why not go to surfshark.deals/Fundie Fridays and use my code Fundie Fridays to get 83% off a 2-year plan and get 3 extra months for free. Protect your data, browse anonymously, and save some money by using Surfshark VPN today. So in November of 2021, Discovery Plus, which is the app that has got all the TLC and Discovery shows, released a documentary called Keep Sweet, which is basically catching up with the residents of Short Creek 15 years after Warren Jeffs was arrested. In this documentary, we see a few familiar faces that I've come to recognize over the years. Every time I involve myself with this group, I see these same women, and one of them is Esther Beislein.
I personally don't believe the stories. I've heard them. It's not that I haven't heard them. It's that I knew him, and they're not true to me because I honestly feel like that there were stories that were made up just to make problems.
Her daughter is also pro FLDS and she's on TikTok, and I won't tell you the name, but you can easily find it if you know what you're looking for. Norma Richter, who is the biggest fucking stan there is for Warren Jeffs. I mean, this woman has such a hard-on for Warren Jeffs, it's unbelievable.
Uncle Warren, all he did is wanted to protect us from some really yucky stuff that's out there.
She's always popping up in public, at court, on the news, on the street, in my nightmares. She's always popping up to defend Warren Jeffs.
The only thing he did that probably got some people a little bit agitated was that he says, hey guys, we've been told to do this by every single prophet. We've been told that this is how we need to live. We've been told this. Why don't we do it now?
Are you sure that's what he did to upset people? That's your final answer?
There's things we won't tolerate. We won't tolerate immorality. We won't tolerate deceit. We just don't tolerate that. And when we find someone among us that's doing that, then they're asked to leave.
This bitch really said, I can excuse pedophilia, but I draw the line at deceit.
I can excuse racism, but I draw the line at animal cruelty.
You can excuse racism.
Uncle Warren was just like his father. They were just genuine, concerned, loving people. I don't know what else to say. I mean, that's my truth, and I'll hold to it.
Either way, Norma is fucking delusional, and she's not the only one. Another person that I wanted to shine a spotlight on that always comes up when discussing the FLDS is Christine Marie Cadis. And in previous videos, I had endorsed her, and I still appreciate certain things about her, like her empathy and the advocacy work that she does for FLDS women, but I do think that she has overstepped her bounds, and she is a little too chummy with a group that condones child brides and violence. At this point, I would call her an apologist. Hi, I'm just recording this because I didn't have a transition. I'm now going to show you the original video, and there will be, only a few more brief interruptions. Today we're going to be exploring the sick and twisted world of Warren Jeffs, along with the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints church that remains in his control to this day. And since we're going to be talking about such a horrible subject, I'm going to treat myself to a little self-care and do a full purple fantasy today. Warren Jeffs is a pedophile, religious extremist, strong-arm tyrant, mass manipulator, and a self-proclaimed prophet. Utilizing a combination of familial politicking and relational violence, Jeffs forcefully took over leadership of the FLDS and began a reign of terror and abuse. Traumatized scores of followers, most notably the many children that he produced in the cult's signature forced plural marriages of underage girls and powerful male church leaders. During his time as prophet of the FLDS, Jeffs molested children and adults of all genders. He ripped families apart in a vulgar display of power, spearheaded an enterprise built on unethical labor relations and lawful but awful child labor exploitation.
We did not know what to expect as we drove to the outskirts of Hurricane, Utah, 23 miles northwest of their fundamentalist enclave.
Holy cow.
The tip was true. Hundreds of children, many of them very small, working on a ranch. They were accompanied by some mothers and a few men, but it was mostly the kids.
There they go. Yeah.
When we got out of the car to find out more about what was going on, we saw something that caught us off guard. The children and their mothers started scattering, first slowly, and then it started picking up steam. They started running in the opposite direction from where they saw us in our camera. The ranch is huge, and they were given an obvious and urgent directive to get as far from us as quickly as possible. Law enforcement authorities believe the money made from harvesting pecans goes directly to Warren Jeffs and his church. Mothers of some of the children I talked to off camera acknowledged they get no money for this work. Men helping to maintain security as scores of vans and cars came streaming in behind the gates were not surprisingly unhelpful.
Sir, can we ask you a quick question? Can you just tell us why all the children are out of school and making money for the church? What, picking pecans?
In the past, I've seen them here past dark, and in the wintertime when it's cool. I don't let my kids out. Once the sun starts going down, it's too cold for children to be out, especially working.
An FLDS mother told me off camera her kids have fun picking the pecans. But when I responded that school had been canceled for a week and families were not being given a choice about this, she declared it's all good, because it's being done for God and for her prophet, Warren Jeffs. He facilitated/instigated incestuous underage marriages. He bent and twisted the core religious principles of his followers to his advantage at every turn, and sometimes out of what seems to be pure sadistic spite. Monsters are real, and Warren Jeffs is one of them. In 2006, Warren Jeffs was placed on the FBI's most wanted list and responded by going on the run. At the time, he had over 70 wives, millions of dollars from various illegal businesses, and multiple compounds full of devoted worshippers. We have a lot to discuss here, so let's dive in. I'm going to give a little briefing to my viewers who aren't familiar with the mainstream Mormon church. And be warned, we are currently in the midst of a Mormon PR campaign to revamp their image for the modern age. You're not supposed to refer to them as Mormons anymore or describe their beliefs as Mormonism. You are supposed to say that they are a part of the church or the Church of Christ. And in case it isn't clear, I will not be participating in this dishonest attempt at relabeling and will continue to use the common nomenclature Mormonism. They're Mormons. I don't make the rules.
Bitch, sit your ass down and shut the hell up, bitch!
The long and short of it is that Mormons are Christians who believe that in the 1800s, a man named Joseph Smith was chosen by God to restore the true church. Joseph Smith had a lot of enemies, and the Christians of the time were not happy about his religion or the rumors that he was practicing polygamy. The original Mormons formed their own communities, had their own currency, and in some regards were seen as encroaching on the larger American society. As a result, the early Mormon church faced persecution and violence and responded by maintaining a nomadic and isolated lifestyle, moving their community on a consistent basis to avoid drawing the eye of larger communities for too long. Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram were eventually killed by a mob while they were awaiting trial in jail, and the rest, they say, is history. Mormons have all kinds of secret ceremonies, traditions, complications with race relations, and their own highly distinct and eccentric culture. Hell, they even have their own state where the laws are tailored to their beliefs. But I digress. We are not talking about the LDS today, or vanilla Mormons as I like to lovingly call them. I also want to make it clear that Warren Jeffs and the FLDS is not the fault of mainstream practitioners of Mormonism.
Hopping back in again to say that I am not a scholar of Mormon history. I can only give you a surface level of information about the group, but I do highly recommend the channel Jordan and McKay over here on YouTube. They are ex-Mormons and they're really funny and smart, and I highly recommend their series about temple rituals, and it's just crazy because from what it sounds like, when you're going through the temple, it goes from excruciatingly boring to abject horror in just a short amount of time. So I can't imagine that. But I love their channel. Check them out.
Today we are specifically referring to the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, which is the name of a specific sect. This can be confusing because sometimes FLDS is used as shorthand for any polygamous Mormon community. While this is not necessarily a factual inaccuracy, since polygamy is tied to the fundamentalist understanding of the Mormon faith, it is critical to recognize that the FLDS does denote a very particular individual sect. On the border of Utah and Arizona, there is an area known as the Arizona Strip. The town is split into two twin communities of Hilldale, Utah, and Colorado City, Arizona. During Utah's quest for statehood in the 1890s, they had to compromise with the federal government and put the kibosh on polygamous marriages. To say that the Mormons were pissed off by this development would be an understatement, but Utah needed statehood, and this was the only way, so it was going to happen no matter what. Deseret, Utah's name prior to statehood, had been negotiating for statehood with the U.S. government for years prior to this, and had suffered a long history of violence and fraud in the process. As you might expect, this is a long and complicated story all on its own. So I'm going to take the time to recommend some books that explain the subject a little bit more. Under the Banner of Heaven, Who May Become Gods, for the research for this video. I do also recommend Rachel Jeff's book, Flora Jessup's book. I have yet to read Prophets Pray and The Witness War read, but I do have them on my bookshelf, and I plan to read them by the end of this year. I know that's a lot to take in, but the most important point that I'm trying to make is that the official LDS Church renounced and banned polygamy in 1890, and everything changed from that point forward. The saints who refused to abandon the principle of plural marriage, along with their families and their entire way of life, mind you, were excommunicated from the official LDS congregation. Several groups branched off from this schism, and these sects would move on to settle the American West. Polygamy is so important to fundamentalist Mormons because they believe it to be a sacred foundational principle revealed by their prophet Joseph Smith. Celestial marriage and a continuation of the family unit enable men to become gods. For behold, I reveal unto you a new and everlasting covenant. And if ye abide not that covenant, then ye are damned. For no one can reject this covenant and be permitted to enter into my glory. And if he have 10 virgins given unto him by this law, he cannot commit adultery, for they belong to him, and they are given unto him, therefore he is justified. Mormons believe in celestial marriage, which is the concept that a marriage will last forever in heaven, if you've been sealed in the Mormon temple, that is. FLDS Mormons believe that there are several layers to the celestial kingdom, and in order to get to the best level, you need at least 3 wives, with each consecutive wife giving you more heaven points. Is anyone else getting an arcade tickets kind of vibe here? I wonder if 2 wives is at least enough to get a spider ring. The mainstream LDS Church does not condone polygamy, and they really don't want anybody talking about it. And a lot of mainstream Mormons are actually unaware that many of their neighbors, co-workers, even close friends are polygamists. in secret. Much of the older generation of polygamists are also living under the trauma of having their families ripped apart and their fathers jailed. Hiding is just a way of life. I say all of this only to provide some context to what we're going to explore moving forward. I don't intend to draw undue comparisons between consensual adult polygamous marriages and the practices of the FLDS under Warren Jeffs. While there are separate concerns around those practices that warrant exploration on their own terms, it would be unfair to place them in the same category as the FLDS. Nothing said here is meant to be an indictment of anybody other than the leadership of the FLDS, especially Warren Jeffs. The FLDS, as we know it, was previously led by a council of 7 male church leaders referred to as the Council of Friends. They made decisions together and consulted each other regularly. They even controlled the UEP, or the United Effort Plan Trust. This entity legally owns all the homes that the FLDS families live in, and it can't be overstated how much power these kinds of arrangements instill in the church leadership. This would also become a huge pain in the ass to break up later on, and I think it must be said that this was a clever defense strategy against legal recourse. The council members were made up of prominent and powerful polygamist men. When the council eventually dissolved, these men branched off into several different directions and led to the creation of some notorious groups. One example you might be familiar with is the Blackmore polygamous community in Canada. Like me, you may have even heard of them from this viral TikToker, Merlin Blackmore. In an act so unpopular it makes the Patriot Act look like legal weed, the U.S. government decided to lose their fucking minds and bring the hammer down on the FLDS community. On July 26, 1953, 102 Arizona officers of public safety and soldiers from the Arizona National Guard entered Short Creek. The community, which was composed of approximately 400 Mormon fundamentalists, had been tipped off about the planned raid, were found singing hymns in the schoolhouse while the children played outside. The entire community was taken into custody with the exception of 6 individuals who were found not to be fundamentalist Mormons. These taken into custody were 263 children. 150 of the children who were taken into custody were not permitted to return to their parents for more than 2 years, and some parents never regained custody of their children. Arizona Governor John Howard Pyle initially called the raid a momentous police action against insurrection and described the Mormon fundamentalists as participating in the foulest conspiracy you could possibly imagine that was designed to produce white slaves. More than 100 reporters had been invited by Pyle to accompany the police to observe the raid. However, the raid and its tactics attracted mostly negative media attention, one newspaper editor. To what stretch of the imagination could the actions of the Short Creek children be classified as insurrection? Were those teenagers playing volleyball in a schoolyard inspiring a rebellion? Insurrection? Well, if so, an insurrection with diapers and volleyballs. The same week that the Korean War Armistice Agreement was signed, the raid achieved notoriety in media across the United States, including articles in The Time and Newsweek, with many media outlets describing the raid as odious and un-American. One commentator has suggested that the commentary on the raid was probably the first time in history that American polygamists had received media coverage that was largely sympathetic. While Pyle lost his bid for re-election in 1954, to Democratic candidate Ernest McFarland, Pyle blamed the fallout from the raid as having destroyed his political career. The anniversary of the raid is memorialized every year, and it is now viewed as sort of a cautionary tale about why you have to keep your family lifestyle secret. You can think of this as a sort of generational trauma, where those who lived through the raid spread and passed their fears onto their children and on down the line until eventually the entire community shared a common and well-reasoned fear of persecution. The secrecy also laid the groundwork for tyrants like Jeffs to abuse and exploit their followers without fear of legal consequence. If your family grew up under the long shadow of Short Creek, imagine how much or how little trust you would hold for law enforcement. Various means that I won't even pretend to understand. Rulon Jeffs actually managed to somehow place himself in the position as sole leader of the group in 1984. And this is where shit really went further downhill. In my research, I found a common theme, namely that people thought that Jeff's family acted too good for Short Creek, hated the country folk, and acted in a manner that can generally be described as holier than thou. The FLDS prophet is a man of many hats. Messenger of God, matchmaker-in-chief, alpha sex maniac, treasurer, church leader, counselor, patriarchal figure, mayor, micromanager, and work supervisor. So many ugly hats you'd think it was the Kentucky Derby. Talk about a hat journey. While they don't worship the prophet per se, he is highly revered and respected. In fact, the prophet's picture is not only displayed in everyone's homes, but also at school and any anywhere else with a flat surface. It is safe to say that while the prophet isn't a deity, they are still a revered figure that is indisputably above question. Members are told the prophet will live to be 400 years old, which I can only assume will lead to a Weekend at Bernie's situation at some point. People seem to like Uncle Rulon as a prophet because he was known to be lenient, at least lenient by the standards that would later be set by his son Warren. Rulon occasionally allowed people to choose their own spouses, and he would forgive apostates every now and then. Don't get it twisted, he was still a creepy pervert with dozens of wives, but I'm trying to highlight the contrast between his rule and Warren's. Turns out things can get worse if you already live in hell. The culture of this community is very unique. Nestled in the Arizona Strip, it is surrounded by red rocks, canyons, and colorful sunsets. It's almost like trading your free will for an amazing view. The people live a quaint rural life and are self-sufficient by making their own food and clothes. Religious beliefs do factor into keeping people enmeshed in the sect, but friends, family, and genuine human connection also play a relevant role that should not be ignored. Sad reality is that abuse is complicated and abusers don't abuse all the time. The good and the bad can become a big ball of string that takes years to untangle, if it ever becomes untangled at all. This hard focus on the insular, private life combined with the laissez-faire approach taken by the government in the years following the Short Creek Raid created a perfect breeding ground for abuse on all kinds of systematic levels. Girls are taught to keep sweet no matter what and display immediate and unquestioning obedience. Sources I've reviewed in the past even showed wooden bed frames with the phrase "keep sweet" carved into them. To the FLDS, keep sweet is as ubiquitous as the golden rule. Inversely, the FLDS commits to a boys will be boys approach to masculinity. This has developed into a culture that treats boys' sexual harassment and assaultive behavior of girls as a non-issue for girls to ignore rather than boys to be trained out of.
Boys must leave the girls alone, and the girls must leave the boys alone. It's a sin to even talk about boyfriends and girlfriends, because you know the right way. We should respect each other, but leave each other alone. The only ones worthy to go to the highest degree of glory in the celestial kingdom, the only ones worthy to become gods and goddesses, kings and queens in heaven, are those who enter into plural marriage through the prophet of God. It's wonderful that you live in a good priesthood home now. You have loving fathers and mothers. But one day you'll grow up. And the only way you can continue on and be useful to the priesthood, the only way you can grow and increase and become like Heavenly Father, is to enter into this law. But you must be worthy. You must be clean. Get close to Heavenly Father while you're young, so that His Spirit will talk to the prophet. What happens to people that enter into this great law of celestial and plural marriage, and then turn away from it? The Revelation says they will be destroyed, delivered over to the buffetings of Satan.
And while they will say that the marriages are not forced, I refuse to acknowledge consent when a minor is taken across state lines, led to a seedy motel. If they refuse, they lose security, housing, and status. It's the choiceless choice. Another challenging facet of abuse to consider is sometimes the only safe option is to play along for a while. We cannot allow ourselves to get angry at vulnerable people doing what they must to survive under a brutalist system. Businesses run by the FLDS exploit the labor of members by having them work for low wages in unsafe conditions. Jobs like these tend to be very profitable since few people want to do them. Thankfully for Jeffs and his ilk, this workforce was not allowed to object. This includes school-age children on construction sites and operating dangerous machinery. The FLDS owns a multitude of businesses and utility companies and are as adept at any large corporation at shielding their works through the use of shell companies, legal loopholes, and dubious ownership. Of note, a corporation owned and operated by the FLDS manufactured the faulty O-rings that contributed to the Challenger explosion in the 80s. I can't imagine how a workforce that is underpaid and overworked on a criminal scale would produce a product of poor quality. The little money that the FLDS members have, they are required to give a 10% tithing, as well as providing for their enormous families. The women in this cult wear what is sometimes referred to as a prairie dress, and they style their hair in the perfect oval shape.
Beginning Basics. We are pleased to present to you a step-by-step instructional video for creating beautiful, artistic hairstyles for medium to long-length hair. Because hair represents image, style, and character, we want to share with you a few examples to demonstrate that the styling of your hair can modify and complement the shape of your face. No matter what shape your face may be, with these few illustrations, we'll explain to you how to create the perfect oval. Because the creating of the oval is usually achieved with the fullness of your hair, we want to demonstrate how to create that fullness using the technique of backcombing. Bring both of these sections forward over the face and repeat the same upward strokes. Bring this hair back up over the top of the head, smoothing it carefully with a rat tail comb, all the while keeping it separated from the back hanging hair. Now you're ready to create your own unique hairstyle and to create the perfect oval.
In this group, the education is very limited. They go to church-run schools and learn the basic subjects. A significant amount of people who have left this group describe being nearly illiterate. Girls have a focus on home economics and submission to men. They use these creepy and suspicious textbooks that have the black people removed and immodest dress edited out. They don't learn any modern history, including the moon landing. Kids have been taught that Warren Jeffs is the president of the United States, and teachers have to fill out this form. If you've been trained in the celestial ways, always put the priesthood first, honor and obey your parents, learn to pray, be kind and loving, and neat and clean. And then you have to be trained on sewing, cooking, gardening, musical, creative, energetic. All skills and talents can and must be improved upon. Required tools for qualification: heavenly smiles, forgiveness, soft tones, faith, humility, persuasion through love, consistency, patience, unshakable sweetness, continual prayers, unconditional love, and giving of yourself. Salary will be paid in full when you see your children called on and used by the prophet. I was also surprised to learn that their schools had a yearbook, so, they're just like us. Women are generally regarded as a kind of currency in this group. A man's social status in the group is strongly considered to be tied to the number of wives he has. Members who are in favor with the prophet will have access to the biggest houses, nicest cars, hottest and youngest wives, and the most influence. Sexual terrorism and soul murder have been used to describe the atmosphere of this place. Many within the cult are on government assistance and, in fact, draw such benefits with pride under the guise of leading the beast. And while I fully support financial assistance for low-income families, this does not pass the vibe check. I expect that the lion's share of this money went straight into the coffers of Jeffs and his closest confidants anyway. Before Warren decided it was necessary to crack down on the overall concept of happiness, the lives of those within the FLDS could almost be described as somewhat normal. While Rulon was still definitely a cult leader and a trash human all on his own, he at least seemed to invest somewhat in the quality of life for those in the flock. Members could watch TV, go to football games, use cell phones, dance, and listen to music. Kids were allowed to play and ride their bikes and have pets. If you can believe it, some even went to public school. Obviously, Warren couldn't allow such degeneracy to continue. So let's dig into the human litter box that is Warren Jeffs. He was born on December 3rd, 1955, to Prophet Rulon Jeffs and one of his wives, Meryl Steed. Warren was born more than 2 months premature and remained small, frail, and sickly throughout his childhood. He lacked in stature, though he made up for in charisma and skills in manipulation. He was obsessed with Hitler and committed himself from youth to accomplish similar goals. Although it could be said that he mainly just gleaned the parts about torture techniques and eugenics, rest assured, if there's a demented way to do something, then that's how he's going to do it. Warren weaseled his way into the inner circle of Rulon Jeffs by acting as his dad's personal lackey and ass kisser. He would spy on others in the fold and report back to Rulon in order to start trouble and breed conflict that he used to advance his power plays. In the 90s, Jeffs was tasked with taking on the role of principal for the FLDS's in-house school, the Alta Academy. This put him in an incredibly advantageous position from which to advance his desires, namely to abuse children and brainwash the entire community from a young age to blindly and zealously follow his directions. Jeffs floated like a dementor through the school, bringing with him a thick cloud of sexual torment and existential terror. cold, measured, and practiced to the point of insanity. Uncle Warren began telling the children that he was the messenger of God and that they must obey him completely or otherwise risk damnation. Warren claimed direct lineage from both Jesus Christ and Joseph Smith. He taught that boys were to be avoided like snakes to protect a girl's purity. This is particularly ironic considering Jeff's consistent instigation of immoral sexual activities with these kids, but there's a lot to unpack here, and we don't have time for detours. On several occasions, Jeffs would start hitting one of his wives, who was a teacher at the school. He did this solely to demonstrate to the children her ability to keep sweet. A quote I read from When Men Become Gods really stuck with me, and it was from one of the girls in the group, and she said, "Our joy was to come from loving our husbands, not from our husbands loving us." In 1998, Prophet Rulon Jeffs suffered a stroke and remained in poor health following the event. This led to Warren speaking on his father's behalf, going behind his back, and making independent decisions. This could be considered the beginning of the downfall in Short Creek from bad to much worse. Rulon died in 2002, and Warren moved to assume the role of prophet, and he married all of his dad's. Power immediately went to Warren's head, and honestly, he had probably been plotting much of his brutality even prior to Rulon's death. Warren started with psychological abuse, nitpicking people on the most minor of things. He began getting more aggressive with his predatory behavior and committed rampant sexual assault of children in his care. Warren declined mentally as well, becoming more and more irrational and tyrannical. His bouts of sadism were often expressed in the form of different bans. Warren started implementing Machiavellian rules intended to suck any remaining joy the flock had in their lives. Examples of these bans include all modern media, including the Bible and the Book of Mormon, various rules for extremely minor behaviors such as those involving buttons, hair, and house cleaning, the banning of mainstream FLDS holidays, activities such as dancing, swimming, basketball, and eating at restaurants, the color red because it's the devil's color, obviously. Warren expressed a particular vitriol for Dr. Seuss, expressing that animals with human characteristics are unnatural. He closed the FLDS library. He forbade children from attending public school or anyone holding jobs that were associated with apostates. He banned a seasoning of food. He banned sex between married couples. Seriously, this dude was asking for a rebellion. He killed all the pets. He was constantly predicting doomsday and encouraging people to take out loans because money wouldn't matter in a few years. If you were kicked out of the group, you were known as an apostate, and the way that these apostates were treated was horrible. Former church members claimed that they had been driven off the road, seen FLDS children peeing on their lawns, and found dead animals with their throats slit left on porches. In September, the office window of a victim's advocate was shot out. A week later, someone blew up an apostate's truck. Rumors even sprouted surrounding Jeff's goals to create a master race, loyal only to him through a secret breeding program known as the Seed Bearers. As one would expect, Warren lived in the biggest house, seriously, it was the size of a city block, and boasted both a privacy wall and security cameras for protection of his terrible privacy. He had a group of goons known as the God Squad who were tasked with driving around to intimidate wandering outsiders, snatching up runaways, and otherwise performing the standard tasks one would associate with goons of any criminal enterprise. The atmosphere in Colorado City was pure torment for everyone not named Warren Jeffs. At one point, this dude seriously banned laughter, and I didn't think it was possible for someone to despise silliness more than Michael Pearl. Although if Michael Pearl had access to these kinds of resources, think about what he could do. On second thought, don't think about that. There were even rumors of people the Jeffs didn't like ending up dead or missing. Do you think people would really do that? Just take complete control of a doomsday cult and then start murdering people for convenience. One common punishment for people was isolation. Many men and women were sent to remote houses in the middle of nowhere to contemplate their sins. And most of the time, these people weren't even told what they had done to warrant this punishment. In these houses, they would be allowed no communication with the outside world, not be allowed to see their children, and had to just sit there and wait it out for months to years at a time. The only tether they had to reality was when a member of the God Squad would come and check on them and bring them some food. The underage marriages really peaked at this time. Girls as young as 12 were being married off to sick old men, and incestuous marriages were encouraged to keep the bloodline pure and white as snow. Genetics of this group are unfortunately so incestuous that they have one of the highest rates of the incredibly rare fumarose deficiency. Fumarose deficiency is an inherited condition that affects the brain and other parts of the nervous system. Signs and symptoms may include a small head, severe developmental delay, poor feeding, weak muscle tone, failure to thrive, seizures, and distinctive facial features. Seriously, I'm shocked that this cult even survived the common cold before the cops came to fuck it up. Mormons tend to keep really detailed family trees. This is sometimes used for the purpose of proxy baptism, but the reason I bring this up now is because of these detailed family trees, scientists have been able to trace this deficiency directly back to Joseph Smith and a specific one of his wives. Under Warren's rule, girls were specifically and deliberately never instructed on sex or anatomy. They were to reserve that privilege to their husbands, who were supposed to teach them the ropes. Unfortunately, sometimes fathers would also give their daughters these same lessons. Warren kept an immaculate paper trail and recorded all his sermons because sniveling villains just seemed to do that sort of thing. He even taped his many sexual assaults. These tapes would later be used in court as damning evidence. I have listened to them, and I don't recommend looking it up for yourself. It is horrifying, and it haunts me every day. Numbers of the FLDS had been steadily decreasing, likely in response to Warren's propensity to publicly shame and humiliate individual members that he didn't like. He would have them stand up at church, accept whatever charges he publicly made against them, then have them walk away, literally, walk away from the town, their wives and children, because Jeffs didn't like them. This happened quite a bit, and families were torn apart this way. Even members who had been married to their wives for over 50 years were not safe from this torment. Reassignment of wives and children was a common and accepted practice, because women are a commodity in this group. They are a resource. They are not seen as people. And everybody just seemed to go along with it. These men and women who were kicked out were known as apostates. When someone had been declared an apostate, they are to be shunned, their pictures are to be burned, and families are instructed to act as if the person is dead. Another strange thing that Warren did was he shut down the Hilldale Temple as a punishment to the people. They were being punished because they had erected a nice memorial statue to the 1953 Short Creek Raid. Sounds like Warren might think that would be nice, right? Instead, Jeffs was quickly able to find something to be angry about, settling on the fact that they hadn't asked permission. So they had their temple shut down, and along with it, no new marriages, blessings, or baptisms were allowed to occur. He hated happiness so much, he literally banned people from practicing their own religion. And like I had mentioned earlier, he banned laughter. In a fit of spite, he ordered the faithful to stop laughing, saying that it drained them of the Spirit of God to be prepared for the apocalypse, which was coming next week or next month or next year. Believers needed to purify themselves. Jeffs believed that the Mormon temple in Salt Lake City was going to be destroyed by Jesus upon his return. So in preparation, Warren started directing resources to his new compound in El Dorado, Texas. This would be known as the Yearning for Zion, or YFZ Ranch. People who were allowed to go were the best and purest of the race, and they would be rewarded with the privilege of reproducing there. Life was so perfect at the YFZ Ranch that no one was ever allowed to leave. Even Jeff's wife, who had breast cancer, she died from not getting any treatments because she wasn't allowed to leave. But seriously, I'm sure it was because it was just such a nice place to be. The ranch covered a massive 1,700 acres. The temple was made from real limestone and designed based on the Mormon temple in Nauvoo, Illinois. The ranch maintained self-sustaining infrastructure, enough supplies for 2,000 people, and a cost of several $1 million to operate. Surrounding locals in El Dorado were not happy about this development, and supposedly Texas even changed the age of marriage from 14 to 16 because the FLDS had arrived. That's not good enough, but it's a start. At this point in time, the border states of Arizona, Utah, and Nevada decided to start enforcing previously ignored laws and cracking down on child abuse. They did not choose to prosecute anyone for polygamy, which was just cohabitation technically, because of the backlash surrounding the 1953 disaster. Warren amassed several subpoenas from dozens of victims and responded by ignoring them. Instead, he went on the run and would hide at various members' houses, all of whom loved helping out the prophet in any way they could. Warren was eventually placed on the FBI's most wanted list, making it drastically more difficult to maintain a low profile. Followers had been instructed around this time to send $1,000 a month to support Jeff's expenses on top of their already burdensome tithing. August 2006, Warren Jeffs was discovered in the back of an SUV during a routine traffic stop. He was wearing cargo shorts, a t-shirt, eating a fast food salad, and all these things are forbidden to his followers. And the best part, in my opinion, the vehicle that he was found in was red, the devil's color.
You've been red.
By this time, Warren's capture seemed all but inevitable. He had gotten reckless, driving during the day with cheap disguises, using credit cards and GPS, and mailing/receiving letters addressed to President Warren Jeffs. Behavior this ostentatious, as we have all seen it in the past, is a common downfall of the North American fundamentalist cult leader, or Predatoris Asholicus, if you prefer scientific terms. After his arrest, Jeffs was transported via helicopter to Purgatory Correctional Facility facility. Yes, that is the real name. The trial drew overwhelming media coverage, with reporters and Warren supporters alike showing up to spectate. The area was packed and standing room only for most of the process. The judge specifically decreed no snickering, talking, or making faces. The jury was hard to select because they needed people who weren't familiar with polygamy and the FLDS for impartial rulings. The SWAT team and bomb squad helicopters had been brought out for protection because there was a real fear from the government that Jeff's followers were going to riot due to the outcome of the trial. Jeff struggled greatly during his incarceration and adjusted horribly to jail.
Oh, boo-hoo! Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
He was acting more and more erratic than ever before and demonstrating himself to be in full personal freefall. He fasted for weeks on end, becoming even more of a fucking ghoul than he already was. Tried to kill himself several times, eventually having to be sedated because he wouldn't stop harming himself. He wrote letters admitting to assaulting his sisters and wives, and he even told his brother over the phone that he is not the prophet, he was never the prophet, and that God has been speaking to him in jail.
You can tell anybody who wants to read this message or see the video that they can see it. Even apostates and Gentiles, that they may know that I have been a liar and the truth is not in me. I am not the prophet. I never was the prophet. You are the prophet. Just a minute. The Lord's still dictating. This is not a test. This is a revelation from the Lord God of heaven. Through his former servant, who was never his servant, who is dictating these words at this time, that you may know this is not a test. I say farewell again to all who qualify for Zion. Farewell. I love you. We love you. We love you.
His followers didn't buy this and insisted that this was simply another test.
I love him as my prophet. If I shut myself off to that negative about him,
You don't believe it's true?
I know it's not true.
During the trial, Warren would refuse to speak and attempted to plead the Fifth Amendment. His defense was throwing everything but the kitchen sink at this problem, despite the mountain of evidence staring them down. He tried arguing that the incriminating papers found in the back of the SUV were confidential between congregation and religious leader, utilizing the same legal rules that protect religious counselors. They even tried to say that Jeff should have never been pulled over in the first place because they had valid tags. I'm sure the jury would agree that invalidates all of the rape. There were several trials and lawsuits since 2007, and some are still ongoing. At this particular trial in 2007, Jeff was being charged with being an accomplice to rape under the charge that he was the religious leader who married the star witness Elissa Wall to her cousin at age 14. Elissa's testimony describing her trauma and abuse at the hands of these monsters was powerful. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when she had finished. Jeff's team argued that he didn't even know she was raped, so he couldn't have done anything about it. They further argued that the generic advice he gave her about remaining with her husband was from the Bible. Jeff continued to act more bizarrely as time went on. In one instance, he wrote "not the prophet" on a piece of paper and stood up and ripped it in a fit of insanity. And despite this display of other weird shit he was doing, the judge ruled that Warren was indeed competent and fit for trial.
Since breaking his silence in his sexual assault trial in stunning fashion last week, reading a proclamation from his God, calling down a scourge of sickness and death on the people of Texas, Warren Jeffs picked up right where he left off this morning, filing a new motion to have trial judge Barbara Walther kicked off the case, referring to the judge and prosecutors as the power of the enemy who seek to destroy purity. Thus you have abused me and my church. I am to now recuse you from this case. I fear you not. Jeff's sermon/motion denied by Judge Walther, at which point prosecutors proceeded with the state's case, calling a DNA expert to the stand who told the court that there is a 99.99996% chance that Jeff's fathered a child with a 15-year-old girl at his YFZ Ranch. Jeff's lowest blow of the day, another alleged God-ordained proclamation in which Jeff seemed to make more threats, saying, "They shall feel my anger in the removing of some by death measures of diseases as well as accidents," and then taking a direct swing at Judge Walters, clearly referencing the fact that the judge suffered a disease as a child and now wears a brace on one of her legs, saying, quote, "Let also Barbara Walters be of a humbling, to know I have sent a crippling disease upon her, which shall take her life soon."
At the culmination of the trial on September 25th, Jeffs was found guilty of 2 counts of being an accomplice to rape. He was sentenced to prison for 10 years to life and began serving his sentence at the Utah State Prison. In 2010, the Utah Supreme Court, citing deficient jury instructions, reversed Jeffs' convictions and ordered a new trial. The court found that the trial judge should have told the jury that Jeffs could not be convicted unless he intended for Alyssa's husband to engage in non-consensual sex with her. And I'm going to fast forward because I'm confused, quite frankly. But on August 9th, 2011, Jeffs was convicted on 2 counts of sexual assault of a child and sentenced to life in prison. During this period of time, things were going awry back at Colorado City.
And in keeping with long-standing FLDS tradition, Jeffs has instructed his followers not to deal with the court-ordered evictions or the controlling land trust, the UEP.
Jeffs was telling people from prison to ignore the local government and not pay their taxes, and just stand back and stand by. Apostates that had been kicked out even said fuck it and started living in these homes again. And if you can believe it, there has even been an influx of non-FLDS members moving to Colorado City and suing the trust for discrimination. In 2008, the YFZ Ranch was raided and over 400 children were taken into custody, making it the largest child custody case in American history. Law enforcement had been trying to infiltrate YFZ since its creation, and it wasn't until a teenager going by Sarah claimed to have been brought to the ranch and forced to get underage married and have babies. Unfortunately, it turns out that call was actually fake, so they had to throw out the entire investigation. Let this be a reminder on why it is not wise to call CPS in a situation where you don't have all the information. This shit has real negative consequences for kids, and at 3 in the morning, CPS arrived and rounded up all the teenage girls and then interviewed the children. The judge even ordered DNA tests on all the children, and some high-profile polygamists who were hiding out at the ranch soon took off. Controversy because people were upset that the state was removing hundreds of children from their families without individual investigation. The children were split up and taken into a holding facility. Mothers were allowed to accompany the kids, but the conditions were extremely poor. Rachel Jeffs, Warren Jeffs' daughter, was living at YFC at the time and wrote about her experience in the book Breaking Free. Next day, the CPS supervisor on site decided to remove all of the children, more than 400 of them in total, saying that their mothers could come if they wanted to. Of course, they wanted to protect their children, and more than 130 women voluntarily went along. Father's underage wives had been sent to their own father's homes so CPS wouldn't know they were married to him, but they were rounded up that night as well. Women and children, more than 500 people, were sent to several different facilities in El Dorado and San Angelo. At the Civic Center in El Dorado, where my siblings were, the mothers and older children were having trouble getting the younger children to settle down and go to sleep that first night because there were so many of them squeezed into one building, and it was very cold inside. The mothers asked the officers to turn off the air conditioning, but their request was denied. Over the next few days, Teresa, Josephine, Angela, and Amon took turns calling me late at night or in the wee hours of the morning from bathroom stalls, shower stalls, and under cots. CPS officials kept confiscating phones when they found them and told the people to turn in their phones or risk being searched. Amon hid his. The state troopers wouldn't allow any of the mothers to contact an attorney either. One mother did leave the building to meet with an attorney, and when she came back, her children had been taken somewhere else and she was not allowed to see them. Many had fallen ill because it was so cold, and others became sick from eating processed food that they were unaccustomed to. A case of chicken pox made the rounds in one location too. There was no way to wash clothing, and few people had time to get extra when they were taken from the land of refuge, so people who were forced to wear the same soiled clothing day after day. Since we had no television or radio, news reports going out to the rest of the world were unknown to us. Finally, my brother Levi called to tell me what the buses had been for. The authorities had told the women with children 6 and old that they and their children were going to be moved to another shelter. When they got to the new location, the mothers were told to go in one door and the children in another. The mothers were ushered into a room filled with waiting police officers, who informed them that their children were now in state custody. When they learned they would not be reunited with their mothers, they were inconsolable, crying themselves to sleep and crying themselves back awake. It went like that for days. Some of them were so psychologically scarred by the experience they would never fully recover. It only got worse. Officials had let children under 6 stay with their mothers at first, but then that changed too. Angela called shortly after it happened to describe Rangers, police, and SWAT teams tearing the screaming children from their mother's arms. My sister Sandra was nursing her 1-year-old baby, hoping that would stop the men from taking her daughter, but they took the baby off her breast and made Sandra leave the building. Angela told me there wasn't enough caretakers to look after the babies. Many of them were left in their cribs for hours, undressed and unattended. Sometimes the babies went hungry. Angela did her best, but there was just too many of them. My heart broke for my family. I prayed that my brothers and sisters would be safe and reunited with their mothers soon. I blamed Father for marrying underage girls and requiring other men in the church to do so as well. I never liked how Father insisted we keep everything secret. It seemed to me that if you have to hide something, it must be wrong. Because Father had so thoroughly convinced the people to keep their lives secret, the children were forbidden to tell their own truth, and now they were paying for it. Ultimately, they could only prove that 5 of the teenage girls had been raped, so all but 1 of the children were returned to the ranch. One child being the 12-year-old bride of Warren Jeffs. She is the one from these famous pictures that did help put him in prison for life. Also, kind of a power vacuum going on. It's up for debate who the current leader / prophet is. Several people have claimed to be the leader, only to be removed or arrested. Personally, I think it's safe to assume that Jeffs is still running the show behind bars. Even though he has said that he isn't the prophet anymore, he seems to have gone back on that because now he's telling them what buildings to build, and writing books and weird essays and putting them in the New York Times. It's crazy. Life in Colorado City has the residents divided between diehard Warrenites and apostates who have been spurned.
So we're just getting pictures of the community. It's not because we're allowed to, sir.
Why aren't you willing to leave me alone?
Because Warren Jeffs is a false prophet, Jerry. And he's damnable. He's killing this community. You asked me, now you got it. No, Warren Jeffs is the devil. Warren Jeffs is the devil.
And things are at a standstill in other ways because Jeffs hasn't ordained any marriages since 2006.
I just wanted to pop on here one more time to set up this clip that I'm about to show you. The UEP is the United Effort Plan, and it was a private trust set up to control the land, businesses, homes, etc. for the FLDS.
If a young man, 18, 19 years old, is ready to build a house, he would go to the religious leaders and say, I'm ready to build. They would assign him a lot and give him permission to build his home on the lot, but he never got ownership. There was never a transfer of deed. And in fact, it was made quite clear that as you built the home, the church who controlled the UEP trust at the time owned the homes and they had legal right to it.
In the late 90s, Warren Jeffs changed that trust to be a charitable one because he didn't want all of the pesky prying eyes of people trying to protect their property.
Why would Warren Jeffs suddenly decide that it was a good idea to transfer it from a private trust to a charitable trust? In a private trust, you have trustees and beneficiaries. The beneficiaries have legal rights. In a charitable trust, there's just a charitable purpose, and the trustees can do anything they want.
Except he failed to recognize that in the state of Utah, a charitable trust is under the auspices and the direction of the Attorney General, which was really his fatal flaw.
When the court saw that Warren Jeffs was absolutely screwing over everybody with this trust, that's when they had to step in.
Dozens of faithful members and ex-members of the fundamentalist LDS Church packed a courtroom as the judge overseeing the United Effort Plan Trust announced he would end court oversight.
I think it's time.
The United Effort Plan Trust controls homes, businesses, and property in Hilldale and Colorado City. Under the UEP, FLDS faithful would consecrate all they had to the church, and then it was doled out according to needs and wants. In 2005, the trust was taken over by the courts over allegations that polygamist leader Warren Jeffs and others mismanaged it by using trust resources for their own gain and not the people of Hilldale and Colorado City. For years, the FLDS resisted efforts to reform the trust and refused to cooperate under orders from Jeffs. But FLDS members argue they're the ones being attacked.
They have evicted all of the religion storehouse buildings, all of their meeting houses, most of their schools. and hundreds of homes.
The UAP Trust's attorney argues there's a new board in place that can be in charge to handle subdividing property and taking care of problems.
They are bending over backwards. When you have people that absolutely refuse to participate and follow the rules of law, that refuse to pay taxes or refuse to ask for a deed, I mean, it's very difficult.
But even ex-FLDS members wanted the judge to stay in charge, not fully trusting the UEP's board to be transparent.
We have a problem in the community, and we need to address these perceptions one way or the other.
The communities have seen dramatic changes since the Utah Attorney General took the trust to court. Where the FLDS once dominated, they're now in the minority in Hilldale. Warren Jeffs is in prison. A lot of his followers have moved on as the trust continues to make changes.
I live there. I pay my taxes. We've never been told not to, so I do it. And I'm still penalized for that and threatened. And my friends and my neighbors, and they're evicted and they're cast out. There's not very many of us left.
So the board will be managed, the UEP Trust rather, will be managed by an autonomous board, and the judge is out. That doesn't mean that the lawsuits are over. Ex-members are still suing the UEP and the FLDS Church, alleging sexual abuse at the hands of Warren Jeffs.
Either way, now, currently, the UEP is run by a couple of apostates, as they're called. One of them whom is a Barlow.
And since 2006, it stayed a charitable trust, but became a new version of the charitable trust that was void any religious test or any religious purpose. And that's the trust that I'm the director of, is the Reformed Trust.
That is a huge part of the documentary Keep Sweet that I was talking about. It shows the current feud between the apostates and the FLDS and how they're dealing with it. But yeah, long story short, the FLDS doesn't want to have anything to do with the UEP now because Warren Jeffs told them to stay away from it. Instead of signing some paperwork and paying their taxes and cooperating with apostates, they are being evicted.
Not signing any occupancy agreement. I will not. To me, that is like telling everybody, the whole world, and them, I agree with you and I don't agree with my convictions and my religion. So why don't I just sign away my religion?
And knowing all this especially makes it even more disgusting that people like Christine Cadis keep referring to this situation as cultural genocide, which is real rich coming from Mormons who have a long racist and violent history against the indigenous people that lived in the American West before the Mormons arrived. So I think they should stay in their lane on that one.
In 2015, a devastating flood went through Short Creek, and it really did a number on the town. Thankfully, some neighboring polygamous sects actually came out to help with the damage. This was actually documented on an episode of Escaping Polygamy. Alyssa Wall and Rachel Jeffs are doing well. They've each written a book and are now bringing awareness to the abuses of the FLDS by starting nonprofits and doing interviews. In 2019, the YFZ Ranch sold for $4 million, and there's also a lot of like documentaries and TV shows now where people are talking about the 10-year anniversary of the YFC raid and how people are dealing with it now. It is pretty clear that Warren Jeffs is a deeply disturbed individual with no conscience or motivation other than those of the self-aggrandizing variety. The FLDS is crumbling, and at this point, no one really knows what the future holds for these people.
Okay, everybody, I hope you enjoyed the video. It was just eating me up inside knowing that there were mistakes in the video and that I hadn't fixed them. If you enjoyed this video, remember to consensually smash that like and subscribe button. Hit the bell icon if you want to be notified the exact second that I upload. Follow me on social media. I post lots of memes on Instagram. Support the Patreon if you really want, but in all honesty, the thing that supports the channel the most is leaving a comment, sharing, and spreading the word. That means more than any dollar amount could ever mean to me. And if you think I'm so funny that you want to wear my merch, I got merch available. It's at Bonfire. Link in the info box below. I love you guys, and next week is a brand new episode, so it won't be none of this rehashing stuff. I love you, and I'll see you later.
People that have caused us the worst harm are the ones that have left our religion and they become empty, I guess. I don't know.